Workplace pensions. We all have them, yet very few of us often take time to actually look at what our investments are within our pension funds. A worrying study by JTT in 2019 found that just 1 out of every 10 people takes the time to investigate what funds are invested through their pensions. So in this video, what I'm going to be talking about is why you need to take control of the funds that are invested in your pension, as opposed to taking what the workplace pension provides as a default. And I'm also going to be talking about what I personally invest in my own workplace pension. Hello and welcome to The Nimble Nomad. My name is Arjun and this is the channel where we talk about money and investing. So I recently had a comment from one of my subscribers, Jay, who actually asked the question of whether we should go for the pre-selected funds that are allocated into our workplace pension, or whether we should do our own choice of investing into workplace pension. So choosing our own investments within a workplace pension. I personally thought this was a fantastic comment and question and definitely merited a video on its own. So here's your video, Jay, and I hope this actually helps out the rest of the subscribers on this channel. Now, before I get into answering the question of whether we should choose our own funds within the pension pot, it's very important for me to explain that within a workplace pension, there are two types of pensions available. So there's something called as a defined benefit or DB scheme, and there's something called as a defined contribution or a DC scheme. So DB essentially is also known as a final salary payment, and basically these sort of schemes offer the employee a final benefit of a final salary which is available and is paid out till the end of their life. Now, these have typically been really favorable just because of the fact that you get a steady income set for the rest of your life. Now, the problem with this is that obviously that you're getting a defined salary and the benefit has been allocated to you. So there's not actually a main pension pot for you to access unless you decide to transfer that pension out to another provider. Now, on the contrary, DC or defined contribution is basically where you set up a fund or a amount of money which you're regularly contributing, and that builds up over the course of your career. And when you decide to retire, basically that pot is available for you to draw down from. Now, in 2021, most of us who are still working are probably still on the DC scheme or defined contribution scheme. So it's really important for you to be aware of this before you make any decisions. Obviously, if you're going to decide to change any of your funds, it's really important for you to find out from your employer which type of a contribution scheme you are in. Most likely you're probably on DC, but just check anyway. So should you choose your own investments within your pension fund? So every time you sign up for a workplace pension with your employer, basically what happens is you get put on a default pension plan which has a predefined set of funds that the default plan has selected for the entire organization. So simply put, this is basically a blunt instrument that has been applied for the entire organization, or rather a one size that fits all. And that actually is pretty crazy if you think about it. So basically what you're doing is you're accepting somebody else's financial plan for you, who's not even considered what your personal goals are, what are your achievements, what is it that you want to achieve with your personal pension fund. And the whole point of the pension fund is for it to build up as much money and capital over your working career, so that when you retire, you don't actually run out of money when you decide to draw down from it. So this is pretty nuanced and quite stupid when you think about it. Yet 9 out of 10 people don't choose to go and check what the default plan is and what they're invested in and whether that actually works for them or not. So the answer to that question, whether you should change your default investment funds within your pension, is absolutely yes. You must change the default funds within your workplace pension because most likely those default plans are not right for you from an investment perspective. Now, you know, on my channel, I don't like making sweeping statements without data backing it. So I did a bit of research, and that same study from JTT in 2015 found that basically the default plans between the top 10 default plans varied significantly in terms of performance. So the least performing or the most worst performing fund on a default plan gave a return of about 3.5%, and one of the best ones gave about 9.5%. Now you're probably thinking that 6% is probably not much in the context of grand scheme of things, and it's a very short period that you're looking at. But to put things into perspective, if you were earning about £35,000 and contributing about 7% into your pension fund over the course of your career, you would have just £166,000 if you were on the bottom performing fund. Whereas if you were on one of the best performing funds as a default plan and you contributed the same amount, you would end up with in the tune of excess of £600,000. Now that's almost a £500,000 difference in those pension funds. So this actually adds weight to what I'm actually saying. So you definitely need to consider whether those pension funds that you're invested in on your default actually make sense for you or not. How should you invest into specific funds within your workplace pension? Now, obviously, how you invest into your own workplace pension depends personally on your own risk appetite and your financial goals. But the main question here is, what are you currently invested in, and does the default fund actually give you the level of exposure? So let's just look at, as an example, one of the funds from a default perspective that I was personally invested into, and I'm going to bring it up now. So this fund was called the Diversified Growth Fund. And when you actually look at the investment objective, because the fund name itself doesn't tell you anything, if you look at the fund objective, it's a very broad blanketed statement which says that it chooses to invest into a range of asset classes both in the UK and overseas, and covers equities, bonds, property and cash. Now that's a lot that this investment fund is currently invested into. So I had to then break it down and actually look at what the breakdown of the investments was. And this is where I found that basically about almost 21% of this fund is allocated towards UK equities and UK bonds. So if you look at the line items here, it basically tells you 21% of your fund is invested in the UK stock market, and that's a pretty high home exposure and a home bias. Now then you look at some of the other equities that you're invested in. So 15.5% is invested in this LGIM Diversified Multi-Factor Equity Fund. Again, I have no idea what this is because it does not say what this is. So I had to actually search for this fund on the internet. And what I found out was that this was basically a mix of equity funds across the globe. And basically 33% of this fund was invested into North America. So basically, I have just about 5 or 6% invested in the US stock market through this fund. That's how I get my US exposure. And that is a really small slice of investment into the US stock market. So when you think about the US stock market, that's a 50% global market cap when you compare it to all the other stock markets. So the US stock market makes up 50% of the global stock market value, and I have a very small allocation to it. Then you look at some of these other investment funds. I don't know what they are, but they look really random. But I focused specifically on this Janus Henderson Diversified Alternatives Fund because it looked really interesting and I wanted to understand what it was. And basically, this is an investment fund that produces a rate of return of 3% so that it can beat inflation and you get some sort of a return. Again, really poor investments, and none of these work for me and none of them are aligned to my financial goals. So needless to say, I sold out of this default fund as soon as possible. So how am I restructuring my pension fund? So I'm in my mid-30s, and provided I continue to work in a corporate job, I have about 15 years at the least still available where I'm going to be contributing into my pension. So that is probably going to end up in a decent amount of sum, provided I keep contributing into it. So for me, I have a fairly long time horizon, and that is one of the main factors with which I'm willing to take more risk with my pension portfolio. So I'm actually deciding to invest everything in equities. So my entire pension fund is fully allocated towards equities, but I do have diversification from a geography perspective. So rather than being concentrated in the UK market as the default was providing me, I've decided to split that out quite significantly. So the way I've structured it is I have 10% allocated towards the UK equity market, 15% towards the world market ex UK, so excluding UK. Then I have about 25% allocated towards the US, and then 30% towards emerging markets, and then 10% each on the developed European markets excluding UK, and 10% on Japanese equities. So this way I've basically got a significant exposure to the entire global market from an investment perspective. And what it essentially does from a diversification perspective, it does is if there is a single catastrophic event in any one of these markets, the rest of the portfolio continues to perform. Obviously, if the entire equity market falls apart, then obviously my pension fund would get destroyed. But the way I'm planning to hedge it is as I get closer to my retirement age, I will start cycling out of those equity positions into more safer investments such as bonds and or fixed income. So that's a long away before I do that. Now, I hope this video helped you out, and I hope you go and look at what your workplace pension is invested into. If it did, please smash that like button and do not forget to subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and I shall see you in the next video. Goodbye.